So here we are in Maya, and we're going to sort of just discuss the surface operators in Houdini, or the SOPs context. But let's have a look in Maya first at how we make some geometry. So I'm just going to make a little cube, and as we know, we can sort of make a copy and move this around. If I rotate it a little bit, I can add a shader. Sort of in Maya, it's a lot of right clicking everywhere, and I can change the color of the object. So I have a sort of red cube there. Let's add a ground plane. Maybe scale it up a little bit. Then we could add a light. So let's go to the create menu, create directional light. There we go. We can see that with shading on. So this might be your typical workflow of sort of making objects in Maya, which is quite straightforward. And if you wanted to sort of model, start to change parts about the objects, you would go into component mode and maybe grab a vertex, or maybe insert an edge loop, that kind of thing, so some more edge detail. Grab another vertex, start to move it around. And if you wanted to make sort of more complicated objects, you could what we would do is generally merge these guys together. We would combine them, and you would keep modeling and building sort of within this environment. So within Houdini, it's slightly different. So let's do the same kind of thing first. I mean, I can just make a cube just like Maya again, make another cube, very easily sort of move it around, rotate it. As you can see, it's very similar to Maya, the way that we can manipulate these objects. And the level I'm at the minute is not really a context as such, it's the object level. I mean, in Houdini, most things that you make are objects, and they live at this level. And then we'll go into the various contexts to do the more interesting stuff, like modeling or texturing or dynamics and stuff. But at the object level, we're basically just laying out the scene. So again, if I create another grid, you'll see that also appears at this object level. I can scale that up just like Maya does. I can go into the material palette and create a shader, sort of give that a color. And again, just like Maya, we can create a light. Let's create a distant light in Houdini rather than a directional light. It's the same thing, just a slightly different name. That's the other thing you've got to get used to, is the differences in terminology. And there we go, we get the very similar scene with that basic setup. Now, the slight difference being is that if I want to manipulate the geometry or modify it, I could do it in the interface here. But that's not really the way we do things in Houdini. What we do is we want to start going into the context, for example, SOPs, the surface operators. And that's as easy as actually just diving inside the node. In fact, let me just point out, actually, you can see here it says objects. This tells us the context we're in. And if I go inside, it says geometry context. This is in fact SOPs. So these are the surface operators. If I hit tab, I see all the surface operator nodes. So for example, I can do other interesting stuff. For example, that's the same thing again. As we've seen before, we could have this defined as a sphere, or I could go back to the box. I could use a transform node, for example, maybe grab vertex face 0 and sort of move face 0 around. We could maybe rotate it a bit, and we'll sort of manipulate that. We can even get handles for that. So we can manipulate the components like this, and we can do various other things instead of manipulating the components. So this is kind of the SOP context, if you like, which allows us to get in there and start playing with the geometry and doing all sorts of wonderful things. So look, I can even merge different kinds of geometries together to make very interesting, complicated things. Not so easy in Maya's sort of interface there. You can't sort of blend different geometry types. So let's have a look at DOPS contexts.